Hi, and welcome to this live reading from Wild Lavender, Book 1 of the Heart and Hand series by Nicole E. Kelleher, and this is presented by Itsy Bitsy Book Bits. Prologue. In the 31st year of the Great Peace in the realm of King Godwin, King's Glen, Aurelia. Her escape had been easy. The real challenge would be sneaking back into their family's quarters, but even the risk of inciting her mother's wrath had been worth it. When would she ever be at High Court again and have a chance to see the royal stables? Navigating the many corridors of the castle undetected was simple enough. Her training included the art of stealth. And as long as her younger sister Claire had not wakened and tattled on her, none would be the wiser. Voices brought her back on point, and she slowed her pace as she approached the king's royal hall. It seemed the lords and ladies at court never slept, preferring rather their games and flirtations. Light spilled across the stone floor in a broadening wedge. She ducked behind a tapestry and flattened herself against the wall, turning her toes inward lest they peek from beneath the hanging and betray her presence. Just in time, she thought, as she heard the gentle patter of a lady's slippers racing past. When the light in the corridor dimmed, she knew the royal hall's door had been closed once more. Her heart galloped in her breast as she darted past. The safety of her room was nigh, only 2 more hopefully deserted corridors and a dark stairwell, and no one would know of her forbidden adventure. She was congratulating herself on her own success when an arm struck out across her path. With the collision, her breath exploded from her chest in an unladylike oof, and before she could collect herself, she was drawn into an alcove and pressed against its wall. Her mind reacted instinctively, gauging all possible means of escape. Damn her long cloak, for it impeded her from kicking out at the man. Patience, she cautioned herself, an opportunity would come. Shh, he whispered to her. You'll wake the castle. She couldn't explain why, but his voice bored into her heart and soul, resonating deep within her. She stretched to get a look over his shoulder to determine if they were truly alone, her height for once being an advantage. But this man, as she pushed ineffectually at his broad chest, towered over her. Exposing her neck to him had been a crucial error on her part, and in the dark of the alcove she saw the outline of his head dip down. Lips and whiskers met her skin, creating the most unusual sensation. Far from unpleasant, she found herself tilting her head to better give him access. It was then that she noticed how hard the muscles of his chest felt under her fingers, and she pressed her palms against the beat of the heart racing in time with hers. She knew she should stop him, and she would, soon. It must have been the thrill of her earlier foray, she determined, that kept her from calling out. She was 18, after all, well past being old enough to marry, though not yet promised. She lost the thread of her thoughts when his fingers traced down her back and his lips lifted to nibble at the bare lobe of her ear. His hands came around to open her cloak. He nipped gently along her jaw, searching for her lips while his fingers encircled her waist. She'd never been kissed before, though a few young men had tried. Somehow this was different, and her anticipation grew. One kiss couldn't hurt, then she would drive her knee up and escape. And if that didn't work, she always had her dagger. His lips were so close to her, she held her breath. But no kiss was forthcoming, and when the warmth of his exhalation cooled, her eyelids fluttered open. Eyes as dark as sin stared back at her. What game is this? The stranger seethed under his breath, and she felt the sting of each word. He must have thought her frightened, for he swore an oath. Do you comprehend how dangerous? He started, taking a step back, and then closed his mouth as she edged warily past him. You need not worry. I am no ravager of maidens. He eased farther away, trying and failing to appear less menacing. Only she was anything but daunted, and he must have sensed her mettle, for his appraising gaze washed over her. He leaned out of the alcove and peered down the deserted passageway, and she could tell from his bearing that he was a young nobleman. Well, as you are not who you are supposed to be, he scolded, you had best run along. She felt her face go hot, and she narrowed her eyes at him in what she hoped was a scathing look. He mirrored her expression and then raised his eyebrow in amusement. She gave him a wide berth, skirted the recess, and backed her way down the corridor, glaring at him even as she turned to flee. A moment, he called to her, and she stopped, shifting her weight to her toes, poised to leap away like a deer if necessary. Tell me your name. Anna, she said breathlessly, her grin as mischievous as it was sweet. His returned smile barely visible in the dim corridor, had her heart tripping in time with her feet as she dashed away. I'm Lar, he called after her, but she did not quite hear. She turned to ask, but when she noticed a flickering light approaching from the opposite direction, she realized that fortune was nipping at her heels. Every second she delayed was a risk that her nighttime escapade would be reported to her mother. So instead, she spun around and raced to her quarters.